America's favourite Englishman in the 1940s and 50s, David Niven. He was charming, elegant, perfect gent. He was part of Hollywood's elite for more than 4 decades. His easy style and lightness of touch earned him huge acclaim in films like Dawn Patrol, A Matter of Life and Death, The Pink Panther, and helped to win him an Oscar for the 1958 film Separate Tables. He was friends with everyone who was anyone, and had a seemingly endless stock of anecdotes that made him a perfect interviewee, as Cliff Mitchellmore discovered in this example from 1968.
But when did you first get the idea that you wanted to become a movie actor, a film star?
The ridiculous thing is, when I'm in Shepherd's Bush,
Yeah.
right here, and when I was at Sandhurst, there was a great comedian called Tom Walls who won the Derby with April the 5th.
April the 5th, that's right.
And his son was at Sandhurst with me. And I was sent away to Malta with my regiment and was not a very good soldier, and thought that pastures new was the move. And I saw young Tom Walls, and I said, I think I'd better try and become an actor. So he sent me here to meet his father, who hated me, absolutely loathed me. And I went back to the army again, but I got the first idea here.
You weren't a very good soldier, you say?
I was very, very bad indeed. And they had a system then in the regular army when you had to have a confidential report, which the colonel wrote, and then you were formed up and marched in, and it was read to you once a year before he sent it to the War Office. And if you agreed, you signed it. Well, of course, you had to agree, so you signed it anyway. And I was formed up, and it said, this officer, though in a few respects excellent, after 2 years in Malta, knows less about the army than most of his friends in the Navy. So I signed it. It was right. I said, very generous, so thank you very much. And not a good beginning.
Then you got out. You left the army.
I left the army, yes, rather quickly. I didn't do anything awful. I made a silly move. I was in love with a lady who lived in London, and I'd just bought a terrible old 15th hand Bentley that belonged to an Australian for very little, but I'd always wanted a Bentley. It was a ghastly sort of cad's car had an altimeter in it and had gears on the outside, and it had a pressure thing. I never quite knew what that was for. You pumped, and I loved this car, and it had a strap over the bonnet, and I loved this lady. And there was a very dull general who was lecturing to us, and I wanted to go to see the lady in London. We were down at Tidworth. I was doing Netheravon, doing a machine gun course or something. So at the end of this long, dull lecture, this idiot general said, any officers want to ask any questions? So he said, what is your question? I said, could you tell me the time? I have to catch a train. And there was an ugly moment, and he said, consider yourself under close arrest. And I was marched off.
What pulled you to Hollywood, though?
Well, I went from Canada. I worked in Canada for a bit and worked on a bridge, and I went to New York and I sold booze. Just after Prohibition, I sold whiskey. And then I ran this ill-fated indoor pony racing thing in Atlantic City. Then I went to Cuba, and with an idiot idea that I was going to be a mercenary. I mean, this is a sort of idiot idea that people still have. And this is incredible as it may seem. At the time that Batista was the revolutionary, who of course was the one who Castro overthrew. And Batista was then the great revolutionary, and I thought, machine gun expert, that I could get a job. And I made some rather extravagant claims in Sloppy Joe's bar in Havana, and said I was open for business, and could be hired. And the next day, a rather nice man from the British Embassy found me and gave me 24 hours to get out of the country. So, well, I hadn't done anything wrong with that. Thank God he came. And I was put on a Japanese ship, which was the first one that sailed, and I went to California, where I must say I thought I would try and get the pony racing going again, because it was such a good idea.
So you didn't really go there to enter films, really?
No,
this wasn't in your head.
Pure financial necessity drove me to the terrible plight I'm now in. but absolutely, and I started off as an extra, Anglo-Saxon type, number 2008 I was,
What was Hollywood like then? Seeing it now, it's very frayed around the edges and really rather tatty and really rather sad, I found it to be.
I agree with you, it is now. I haven't been there for, well, I went last year to make a picture there, but I haven't lived there for 8 years. But it was marvelous then. It was really great. And when I say because there was no television, don't be insulted. The reason it was great was that the only way into it, into the business, was by being an extra. Because there was no television, there was no showcase, you see. And all of us, all of the extras were would-be stars. I'm rather hot. Can I take my time?
Yeah, do. Mm.
And they were all of us were would-be stars, and most of us started that way. And so there was a marvelous electric feeling on the set. Nowadays, the extras, with all due respect to them, it's an awfully tough job. Most of them are doing other jobs, you know. A lot of them are housewives, and they go and pick up little pocket money, but haven't got that great drive. And we used to stand there, and the assistant director would say, now, I have one line for somebody. All right, he'd look round, and he'd say, all right, you, and you, and 4 of us form up, and we'd read the line right down the set, and whoever read it the best got the job. And then you built from there.
You shared a house, didn't you, in those days with Errol Flynn?
Yes, I did, just after that. We had a house on the beach called Cirrhosis by the Sea, for rather obvious reason. But Errol was, he was funny. He really was splendid.
Was he as tough as everyone said he was?
He was really a very, very tough man indeed. And for instance, we did 2 pictures together. We did the first one was The Charge of the Light Brigade, and then we did The Dawn Patrol. It was always on television. And the late show in America. And I'm in The Dawn Patrol, by the way, for one moment. I'm the first man to drop an atomic bomb, because I remember this well. I was in a Sopwith Camel aeroplane, biplane, and Errol was in another one, and we were flying over Krupp's armament works in Essen or somewhere. And I remember in the film flying this plane and bending down and picking up from between my legs a bomb with a handle on it. And dropping this bomb on Krupp's and blowing the entire place to smithereens. It's the first one. But anyway, back to Errol. Errol was, you said, was he tough? When we did The Charge of the Light Brigade, there were 600, they had 600 really tough fellows for the charge, and they were all cowboy stuntmen, and I knew a lot of them, and I did 27 westerns before I ever spoke. I knew most of them. They were really a rough group, marvelous group. And Errol went through a period, which we all go through, having rather a swollen head. He just made a big success in the first picture. And we were lined up, the 600 fellows, and I was one of the junior officers, and 2 officers, and Flynn was in front. And Flynn was taking it all a bit seriously, and he'd let the reins go on his horse, and he was sitting back, giving it, you know, getting the hat straight and getting everything touched up before the charge. And we had rubber lances in case anybody poked anybody's eye out, these wobbly tips. Yeah. So one of these enormous fellows behind leant forward his lance, and up Errol Flynn's horses behind, which went like this, and Flynn went about 19 feet in the air. Now, if it had been me, I'd have got up and said, oh, please don't, and would have got on my horse. But not Flynn. He said, which of you sons of bitches did that? So this huge orangutan said, I did. You want to make anything of it? So Flynn said, I certainly do. And he pulled him off the horse. And they fought for, minutes. And he murdered him, absolutely massacred him. And they adored Flynn after that, thought he was great.
You were trained in the army, but what sort of stage training, what kind of film training did you get? Did anyone then consciously take you and train you in the business of making films, in the business of being, well, an actor?
Well, you really learned it, you see, you really learned it as you went along. It's the only way. I'm always suspicious of these schools of acting. I mean, if you're lucky enough to get little jobs to start with, I learn every day now. You learn by the... I remember Larry Olivier said to me once, I did a play, and I'm a very, very bad stage actor. I'm a pretty bad movie actor, but I'm an absolutely ghastly stage actor. And he was, my friend and almost relation, Noel Coward, were responsible. They said, you've got to go on the stage and learn, do it. I'd been starring in movies, so I did it. And I was awful. But Larry said, you will learn more by a disaster than you will from a success. He's always said that. When I am a very, very bad actor on the stage. I'm no good at it, because I can't concentrate. And I love the opening night, because the possibility of disaster is quite great, and that's sort of fascinating. And I love the first week or so, but then I get bored. That's why I'm so bad. I'm not trained. And I begin to get fascinated by the audience, you know. My attention wanders, and if I see something good going on, or something good, let's face it, down there, I'm apt to Be checking and... no good.
Wandering eye.
But I've done 2 plays. One was a great disaster and one was a great success. And I really don't know which I hated the most.
Amongst Niven's biggest hits was the much-loved 1956 film Around the World in 80 Days. It was produced by Mike Todd, but Niven played a leading role in every sense, as he explained in a film night special in 1970.
Mike made me, not officially, but very unofficially, his assistant producer, because he'd never made a movie before. And so I was in on all the casting. And Mike said to me, now, who's going to play Mr. Fix, which is the famous detective, you know? And I said, well, there's only one man who was put into the world to play it. It was Bobby Newton. Oh, he said, that's a great idea, let's get Newton. I said, but I have to warn you. And Bobby would be the first to say that he hasn't worked for a little while because he took to the bottle for a long time, you know, and it's been a problem. He has a problem. Oh, we'll send for him. I said, well, please don't say I said anything. He's a great friend of mine. And he would be wonderful but you must get this worked out. So he sent for Bobby Newton, and I was standing behind the chair. And in came Bobby with that marvelous face and blue nose. And so Todd said, Newton, you ever heard of Around the World in 80 Days? Oh, dear fellow, ooh. So he said, how'd you like to play Mr. Fix? Ooh, my dear fellow, what a role, ooh, went on. So then Todd said, well, your pal Niven here says you're a drunk. And I fainted, you know. And you know what Bobby said? Understatement, dear fellow. And he was marvelous, and he took the pledge with Mike, and he never had a nip the whole way through the picture. 6 months.
In this film, David Niven had a number of ballooning sequences, although heights are a problem for him.
Well, I mean, heights do, but I get the full vertige, you know. But yes, when I read the script, it said Mr. Fogg goes over the Alps in a balloon. I said, not me, Charlie, I'm not going over the Alps in anything. So Todd said, well, how high will you go? And I said, 4'6". So they put it in the contract, no higher than 4'6". Now, the great day came, which was the ascent of the balloon from Paris or somewhere. And I'm in the basket, supposed to be, with Mario Cantinflas, who was a bullfighter, you know, is a bullfighter, a wonderful actor, he's also a bullfighter, a very brave man. So I said, Mario, I'm not going to go up in that thing, are you? No, he said, nothing will get me up. And they had the highest crane in the world, I don't know, 200 and something feet, with a line with a hook, and the basket on the end of it, and the arm was going to go out over the canyon with a 2,000-foot drop, you know. So I said, nothing will get me in there. Mario said, me neither. So now we saw these doubles, and these terrible sort of orangutans came shuffling out. The one with my top hat on, and the other one with Mario's other hat, and it was ridiculous. So Mario said, oh, you can't let me come here. And he started getting into the basket. Now the whole glory of the Anglo-Saxon world is on my back, isn't it? And I couldn't let Mario go up with my double. So I had to do it. So I said, all right, well, Hennessy brandy, that's all, and the whole bottle was brought. It looked like the most drunken performance has ever been, hanging on those ropes. I didn't know where I was, and it was absolutely terrifying. And incidentally, when we landed, the crane brought the basket in over the top of a village that they'd built, and we hit the top of the church with the bottom of the basket, and the whole basket tipped right forward like this. And I'm looking down about 60 feet.
By 1974, Niven had added the role of successful writer to his CV. His best-selling autobiography, The Moon's a Balloon, led to more invitations to talk about his career. And here, he's talking about how he started out as a Hollywood extra.
It was terrifically overcrowded. I think at that point there were 22,000 extras fighting for 800 jobs every day. And we got $2.50 for working. And it meant that I think the highest paid extras were pulling down $5,000 a year, which is about £800 a year. They were the highest paid ones. And most people were pulling down 150 quid, that sort of thing.
You may have been listed as Anglo-Saxon type, but in fact your first part was as a Mexican bandit.
Mexican bandit, I was. And the first, yes, in a Western.
Hopalong Custard.
Hopalong Custard, oh, yes, you've really done your homework. And I did 27 Westerns. Never allowed to speak, of course, with this voice coming out. And there was one marvelous moment, because they used to do Westerns in groups of 3 in those days. And they get the money together. In the West, they were usually shot in about 5 days. So they'd put everything they could into the first one, hoping it would make a lot of money so they could put more into the second and third. And this group that I was in, they had very little money to make the third of the group. So I arrived for the big scene, 600 extras had been called, and there were 6. They couldn't afford the others. And the assistant director said to the director's name is Aubrey Scotto, and he said, Mr. Scotto, I'm afraid that's all we've got the 6. And I was one of the 6 for some reason. And he'd made a marvellous remark, and it should be a book about Hollywood. He said, make it a sleepy village. And we were given wood, wood and knives, and we whittled, and then we changed into Indians, and it was marvellous.
Yeah. I suppose this would account for the amazing number of films you made in one year, because, I mean, 1936 alone you made 6 films.
Well, those, you see, were what Laughing referred to as starring roles by that time.
Yeah.
But also, under contract, a man like Sam Goldwyn, they'd buy you, I mean, they'd hire you and put you on a long-term contract for very little, and then they would teach you so that you'd be made. You'd go from one picture to another. And in those days, we'd be finishing one picture, rehearsing the next, and probably doing retakes on the one before.
Everything one reads about you, and from everything you write, really, one gets the impression that you don't take yourself terribly seriously, or I won't say your work, but certainly your qualities as an actor you don't take terribly seriously. Is this genuine or a studied?
No, I don't think it's a studied thing. I think it is genuine because, I mean, first of all, the astronomical luck that I've had, so you can't take yourself seriously. I mean, by and large, I've done whatever it is, 80-something pictures, and the luck of still being at it after all these years is one thing. Because it's all typecasting in the movies, isn't it? I mean, they never ask me to play a Japanese laundryman or something. It's always officers, dukes, or crooks, or dishonest bishops, or something like that. It's always in the frame.
Yes, you say you don't. You know, you've been very lucky, which perhaps explains why you hadn't taken yourself very seriously or worked very seriously. But in fact, there was one film, Separate Tables, for which you got an Oscar. So presumably you did take yourself fairly seriously.
I misled you. I do take my work very seriously indeed, and I pride myself on never having been late in 40 years and everything, all that, and take it very, very seriously, and do my best and get there knowing the jokes but I don't take the result very seriously, and I don't expect it to go on forever, and I never did.
The following year, the publication of a collection of his favourite tales from Hollywood meant a visit to the Parkinson show. And once again, Niven would show that no one could top him as a showbiz storyteller.
Do you find inspiration comes easily to you as a writer?
No, not at all. I mean, first of all, I got absolutely no powers of concentration, whatever. And if it's a nice day, I can't write, because it's something else to do. And if it's raining, it's too dreary to write. And I'll make any excuse. I mean, if an aeroplane goes over, it's a bonanza. I'll watch that for hours. And my wife, I can't wait. I beg her to come along with some awful news that the boiler's burst or something. You know. And finally, I've got one little chair in the garden, right up against a corner of a hedge like this. I can't even see the sky, and I sit there and do my best.
Yes. Do you regard yourself now as an actor or as an author?
Oh, as an actor. I mean, I regard this as a terrific, not a sideline even. I mean, I'm an amateur at it. I love doing it. If it's a success, I mean, I was so happy with the unexpected success of the other one, because I really wrote it for a few chums for Christmas, you know.
You were an awful lot of chums.
Well, it turned out, I mean, it's ridiculous, really ridiculous. I don't know what will happen this time.
But how do people regard you now, David? I mean, when you meet people, do they think of you as David Niven, the author, or David Niven, the actor?
Well, I tried it on the other day. I went home. We lived near Nice, and I know all the little men down there. And so usually, when you fill in that thing at the air, on the flight, occupation, I always used to put actor. So this time I put author just for fun, you know. Oh, monsieur, I got all this bit from him. He said, well, why have you changed your profession? And I said, well, I may not have heard it, even in French. I said, I've written a bestseller. And he said, that does not make you an author, it makes you a fluke.
Bring on the Empty Horses. That's an intriguing title for a book about Hollywood. How does it arise? Where does it come from?
Well, I have to put a little self-bleep machine into this.
You don't have to.
I do, I think.
You do, all
yes. there was a great Hungarian director called Mike Curtiz, and he was directing The Charge of the Light Brigade. And his English was very peculiar. And Errol Flynn and I were standing underneath the rostrum, and he was on it, and the charge had taken place, a lot of it. And as you know, everybody was killed. And it was time for about 200 riderless chargers to arrive. So Mike, with his megaphone, says, "Bring on the empty horses." And so Flynn and I fell down, you know. And he turned on us through the microphone, the megaphone it was in those days. "You bums, you lousy, limey, you jerks," you know. He said, "You and your goddamn language, you think I know bleep nothing, and I know bleep all."
You've been in Hollywood for, what, 40 years, haven't you? It's about.
Well, I've been in the business 40 years. I lived there
years.
for all those 25 years, and I go back often.
What was it? Do you remember distinctly your first impression of Hollywood when you first arrived there?
Well, that was the early 30s, of course, and Hollywood is a small outcrop of a huge town, really. So Los Angeles then was the biggest city and area in the world. In fact, there was 1 square mile for every 4 inhabitants, because large chunks of it went built over. And Hollywood is a sort of suburb, and it was rather baroque, dusty place. And you have to imagine the big sort of horseshoe of the Pacific like this, and then here is a horseshoe of hills, and then about a few miles away, and then 20 miles of valley at the other side of the hills, and then a horseshoe of mountains with snow on them. And the sun sets this way, and Hollywood's up against those hills. And it's a spectacular setting, but the architecture that was ridiculous, really, because the city planners got left behind all the time. The place grew faster than they could plan. And Hollywood itself is this one rather strange, rather sad little suburb. And all the studios were sprinkled all over the city, which had no transport, really, so we'd have to get up at 3 in the morning to get to work. And one oasis of charm in the place was Beverly Hills then, in those days. And all the streets were planted with different trees, acacias and palms and magnolias and pines and eucalyptus. Are beautiful. And I took the trouble to go once and ask the Rodeo Land and Water Company, which had subdivided the place, who did it. And to our great credit, it was a little man from Kew Gardens.
Really?
Yes.
He started that whole
He did.
extraordinary thing. And what was it like being a young, struggling actor in those days in Hollywood? As you said, there were the great days. There was a big industry there. But of course, you didn't walk in straight away and become a superstar, did you?
Oh, no, I was an extra, and that was hell. That was really hell.
What kind of extra were you? I mean, were you typified, classified?
Yeah, I was classified because there were the dress extras who were very snooty, and they had clothes for every occasion. You know, they had ball gowns and race-going clothes and office clothes and bankers' clothes and all that. And they got paid $10 a day, and which is about £3, I suppose. And then there were the people who looked all right in uniforms and that sort of thing, could walk properly. And the rest of us were the cattle. I was one of the cattle. And we were put in sort of ethnic groups. There were, you know, Asian and American red and American white and American black. And I was Anglo-Saxon type 2008. And you just went by that. But the thing that struck me about Hollywood was how difficult it was to get there. Because one forgets how enormous that country is. And from New York to California is only a little bit shorter distance than from London to New York. So it was 4 days and 4 nights on a train, or about 2 weeks in a ship going around by the canal, or 24 hours flying in the most horrendous aircraft at 5,000 feet, flapping about in that awful weather, with every possibility of thudding into the Allegheny Mountains on the way. And it took everything. So nobody came out from Broadway, unless they were big stars, and there was no television. So the only way into Hollywood was there in Hollywood itself. So you went there, if you wanted to be in it, and became an extra and prayed and starved, usually.
Yes, and starved, literally. I mean, you had to find something else to do.
Well, there were 22,000 of us at one point registered, looking for 800 jobs every day.
22,000?
Yes.
How many of that lot who started as you did as an extra made stardom as you did?
I think, honestly, a tiny, tiny proportion. And if the first prize, which is only a prize for a day, the Oscar, it's a group effort anyway, but somebody gets it each year. I think it is, I went down to Central Casting the other day, and they now have computers, and it's something like 1,000,000 to 1 against.
Yes.
The luck is absolutely horrendous.
Do you remember the first lines you ever spoke in a movie when you moved from being an actor?
Yes, I remember the first 3 lines I spoke.
First 3 lines.
One was, I said, hello, my dear, no, goodbye, my dear, to Alyssa Landy at a railway station. And I was such a smash in that I was hired to say hello, my dear, to Ruth Chatterton at another station. And then my big moment was in a Sam Goldwyn production with Miriam Hopkins and Joel McRae and Edward G. Robinson. And I was a Cockney sailor. And I was thrown out of the window of a brothel in San Francisco into 3 foot of mud. And I said, all right, I'll go. And Miriam and Joel and Eddie Robinson and some donkeys and 40 vigilantes walked over the top of me.
Auspicious debut.
Yes.
Yeah. What about one of the fascinating things that comes out in what you've written is the amount of importance that was attached in those days in Hollywood to publicity, to the value of publicity, so making yourself known. I mean, what kind of tricks did they get up to, sort of publicity experts?
Well, Mike, you see, in those days, it was not great talents. It was great personalities. And there were probably 40 people who could support a picture. Today, there are probably 4 who could support any picture.
Yes.
And it was a case of publicity, building up grains of sand until they became sizable hills that could be seen a long way off, really. And they got up to all sorts of tricks. And the first publicity man came from the circus, came from Barnum and Bailey's circus, a man called Harry Reichenbach. And he was hired in the early days to publicize one of the first Tarzan pictures. And he booked a room in a hotel on the ground floor in the hotel right opposite where the theater was in New York, where it was going to open. And a large packing case was delivered to his room. And then he pressed the bell and ordered 8 pounds of chopped hamburger for lunch. So the waiter tottered up with this great platter. And there was a large lion sitting at his table with a napkin around his neck. So the waiter sued Harry Reichenbach and immense publicity. That was really the first publicity stunt.
Really?
And it sort of backfired. He got badly sued. The next one that backfired was Mae West. Mae West backfired? That sounds very strange. The next one that backfired was Mae West. And she was doing a movie called It Ain't No Sin. And they had a brilliant idea, and they got together 140 parrots and put them into intensive training. And these poor animals were taught to say, it ain't no sin. And they were going to be put on perches in hotel lobbies and things all around the city for the opening of the picture. And at the last minute, the Hayes office, which was the group in charge of the morals of Hollywood, decided that It Ain't No Sin was a dirty title and changed it to I'm No Angel. So the poor bloody parrots were taken away and given a crash course in this. And then they were put on the perches, and frightful noises and whistles came out, and they were sent home in disgrace.
The other people, of course, who were around about that time, it's absurd, isn't it? were the gossip columnists. I mean, as you say, Hollywood invented the publicity stunt. They also invented the gossip columnist, didn't they? And you suffered, or certainly lived through, the 2 most powerful were women, weren't they? Hedda Hopper.
Well, they were immensely powerful. Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons. And one was short and fat, and the other was long and thin. And they were both mines of misinformation.
Yes.
But they were very, very powerful, because between them, they covered every single newspaper in the United States. They had millions of readers. And they had daily big profiles, they did. They were very powerful. I don't think they could ever destroy anybody who had great talent. They both hacked away at Marlon and never destroyed him. They had terrific favorites, and they had terrific enemies. Hedda's great enemy was Orson Welles, because he made Citizen Kane, and Hearst, of course, was the prototype of that, and Hearst was her boss. And Hedda took against Chaplin. She loathed Chaplin because she was very politically minded. But it was much easier with those other things she thought he was very left-wing and commie and all that stuff. In fact, as she was dying, aged 82, and written her last column the morning before, I think, she said, I hear that son of a bitch Chaplin is trying to get back in the country. You got to stop that, and then died, you know. But they were very rough, and the studios used them, and I remember I was under contract with Sam Goldwyn for 15 years, and something happened. I had a contract that was coming up for renewal or dissipation or something, and Goldwyn decided to soften me up for The Kill and to get me to settle for less money. And I was rather popular, I thought, at the studio. I'd been there as a beginner, you know, and I picked up the paper. Headline, Niven Unbearable, say fellow workers. And a big thing saying I'd got so swollen-headed that nobody could work with me and I hated me on Goldwyn, and Llewellyn put it in to help Goldwyn. I mean, that sort of thing did happen.
Yeah, it must have made life very uncomfortable. I suppose that you had to be pleasant to these people.
Well, you know, you did. You see, we were all whores, really, because it was much easier to go with them than against them, honestly.
Yes.
And they could make it very uncomfortable for you.
Did you ever get a chance? I mean, the problem is that all the actors, particularly, always say that the problem is that they can never get back at their critics. Did you ever manage to get back at any of them?
Well, we did a little thing once. Ida Lupino, it was a great friend of mine, and she was married to a very rough man called Howard Duff. She still is. And my wife, Yordis, my wife, and we loathed Hedda and Llewellyn at this point. We both had problems with them. All four of us had problems. So we had a little plan. We had dinner together. And then I called up Ciro's, which was the sort of chic nightclub, and booked a table for two. And the head waiter said, oh, yes, Mr. Niven, just you and madam. And I said, just give me a quiet corner table in the dark. And then Ida and I arrived. And terrific twittering, because there were spies everywhere for the colonists, you know, in all the brothels and in all the hospitals and everywhere there were spies. And immediately, I mean, next thing I knew, about 3 or 4, 15 cameramen arrived, and here Loopy and I are sitting in one corner, she's nibbling my ear and the whole bit. And right in the middle of all this excitement, in comes Howard and Yordis, and go to the other side of the dance floor. And Loopy, you know, says, she overdid it, she said, you must flee, you must flee. I mean, and Howard, who was reputed as a brawler, you know, now he spotted us and kicked over his table, crashed. Now everybody in the place is watching. Everybody's waiting. And I pretended to be a bit gassed, you know, and I got up from mine, and we took our coats off. Big deal. Now all the photographers getting into position for the kill. And the dance floor's cleared, and we go on the dance floor, and we circle round, you know, looking at each other. The classic Western ending, you know. And then finally, we grabbed each other, kissed each other on the mouth, and waltzed all around the room. Llewellyn called me in the morning and said she would not be woken up for false alarms.
How difficult was it, though, to remain unimpressed by it all, by once having made it? I mean, was there any advice ever offered to you that you hung on to, which kept you sane and a survivor in Hollywood?
Well, Gable was a great chum of mine, and he was a real feet on the ground man, you know. We used to go fishing together a lot. And he always said, you know, if you ever get to the top, be tough with the brass, with the moguls. And don't forget, he always said that it's a terrifying scenario we're taking part in, and we're going to get it in the end. Everybody expects that. And he used to say, I personally take Tracy's advice, Spencer Tracy's advice, which is to get there on time, know the jokes, take the check, and go home.
Yes. That's the way.
But I think, honestly, Michael, you're being complimentary. I think I was getting completely out of control, because it's very difficult not to believe your own publicity. It was in those days, because there was so much of it. Pages and pages. As I said before, you know, in those days, before television, there was no competition. So the Sunday Express here, for instance, would have 4, 5, or 6 pages on Sundays of Hollywood news. And it was incredible. And you began to read your own publicity and believe it. And you know, if you read 3,000 times a week that you have a very attractive twitch of the right eye, you know, you begin to twitch, you know. And I was twitching all over. I think I really was saved by the war, because I came back here, and for 6.5 years, was brought down to earth smartly. You know,
But did it put all this an impossible strain on your married life, for instance?
Very much so. It really did, because For instance, in our marriage, it lasted for 20-something years, thank God, it certainly put an awful strain, because Hjördis is very, very beautiful. And she was the top model in Sweden and so on. Now, a very beautiful woman should immediately, I mean, this is a tiny part of just a tiny example, should immediately attract the attention if a couple walks into a room or a restaurant.
Yeah.
But if she walks into it with a dreary old bulldog face that's been around for 500 years, she gets it second, you know, or used to anyway. And also table hopping, when people are plucking at you in Hollywood, what about you? And is left there standing. And it got to such a point she left.
Really?
She left. She said, I've got to find out if I'm anything anymore. This was after years of marriage too. And she left. She took off for 4 months. And I realized the horrendous thing that because of all that nonsense, I was taking the most important thing for granted, really.
Yeah.
But thank God we got the show on the road again and everything was all right.
The marriage was reported to be unhappy, with claims that Niven had numerous affairs. But with typical humour, he said he wanted to go down as the only Hollywood actor who never got a divorce. In 1981, Niven was back on Parkinson, promoting his second novel this time, but once again treating the audience to more stories of his extraordinary encounters.
It's extraordinary, in fact, looking at the kind of people, the range of people that you met. I mean, just about everybody was anybody you met at one time or another. I mean, you met during the war when you came back to England, from America to join up. You met Churchill, didn't you, on a couple of occasions?
I did. I was so lucky to meet him, and I was so lucky to meet so many people. I met him because when the Germans had taken most of Europe, all of it, in fact, they had a beam from France over Chequers and a beam from Norway like that, so that all they had to do was send a bomber down the beam and drop an egg on Chequers. So a man called Ronnie Tree had a lovely house in Oxfordshire, and he gave Churchill a wing for the war where he could go for weekends and that sort of thing. And he used to be there with his staff, with Portal and Douglas and all these people, fascinating, and Duff Cooper and Eden, and I had no home. And Tree also let me spend my leave there, in his part of the house, obviously. And so I used to meet him when I went down on leave, and it was fascinating. And he took me, he loved them. He loved the movies. He loved to talk to me about the movies. He loved Deanna Durpin. Great talent, he said, and all that. And the first day I saw him, I'd just come in late, I got the uniform on, and he got up from the table and walked. Everybody stood up. He came to me and said, they were all listening, all these great admirals, young man, a most magnificent effort to give up a most promising career to fight for your king and country. I said, and he said, mark you, if you had not have done so, it would have been despicable.
What other memory do you have of him, David? Anything at all?
Well, he'd love to go for walks. He'd take me for walks. And I remember when it was absolutely at its blackest, when the Japs had just sunk the Prince of Wales and George V off Malaya, and terrible disasters in the desert and everywhere. And I said to him, somewhere in the middle of Oxfordshire, sir, do you think that America will ever come into the war? And he said, you mark my words, something cataclysmic will occur. Cataclysmic, I've never had before or since. And 6 weeks later, Pearl Harbor. So now another 4 months go by and I get leave again, and there he was, come for a walk, off you go. So I asked him if he remembered. He said, certainly I remember. So I said, what on earth made you say it? He said, young man, I study history. Goosebump time.
Yes. You've got, I mean, what you've built up over the years, both as an actor and as a writer, is a sort of persona, which is beloved, actually. I mean, that's what you are with the people who read you. And no, it's true. I mean, this is exactly what you are. But is it necessary for you to be liked? I mean, do you work hard at it?
I don't really work hard at it, but let's face it, I think everybody who becomes an actor probably becomes an actor for just that reason. They want to be liked. It could stem from being bashed around at school like I was, my bashing around is nothing to being brought up in the Gorbals or something like that, but for its size, it was nasty. And I think I definitely wanted to be liked. And I started doing concert thing at school to be liked and tearing the trousers and all that business to be liked. And don't think for 1 second when I walked down those steps and all those sweet people clapped, I didn't enjoy every second of it.
If you went in, let's take a silly hypothetical situation, supposing you went into a room and there were 20 people there who liked you and one person who you felt hate, what would you do?
Go straight to them.
Would you?
Oh, yes.
Charm them?
You absolutely go right at them. Oh, yes.
You obviously couldn't stay there if you felt that somebody didn't like you.
But you know, the old days, before transatlantic flights, you used to cross on the big liners, and arriving in New York, Queen Mary or something like that, they had passenger list, and they had a big room for the press who came out on the cutter, the pilot cutter, and they'd say who they wanted to interview, and you'd be wheeled in. And there was one man I never forget. You do your best, and he'd just be sitting like this. And you go for him all the time, trying to make him like you.
Have you ever not liked yourself?
Oh, yes. Yes, I've done not awful things, but nasty things. I did a beastly thing once. I had an agent, very good agent, and he'd done very well for me. And he's a very nice man, he's a friend. And my contract was just coming up with him to renew it. I was going to renew it, of course. And the top agent of Hollywood only had about 5 people, a man called Burt Allenberg, and if you were with him, that was it. The big golden gates were open. He had so much power. And he said, David, I want to handle you. And I said, well, what about Phil Gersh? He said, that's your problem, kid. And I sat up all night. Michael, greed won. And I went to see Gersh. I said, Phil, I'm sorry, I'm not going to renew. He said, why not? And I said, I don't know, I just want to change my butcher. He said, you know, you're the only actor I've ever liked. I'll never handle another. You're just like the rest. I'll only handle directors and writers. It's true, he did. And I crawled away, and I went to see Allenberg. I said, I've done it. And he said, that's great. Now, tomorrow I'm going to see Zanuck, LB Mayer on Tuesday, Warner, and I have great news Thursday morning. Call me Thursday morning. Big contract. Couldn't wait for Thursday. I felt a little bit ashamed. I called on Thursday morning, and the secretary was crying. And I said, what's the matter with you? And she said, Mr. Ellenberg died in the night. So,
you still cringe at that one,
I still cringe.
Yeah. Do you see yourself, actually, as a survivor of a lost time?
Well, let's face it, my group's been called up. And, yes, I'm a survivor. And I'm not going to volunteer for the next thing. But yes, I suppose I am a survivor. Thank God. But it's been such fun. I mean, I'm so lucky. How many people in this room, in this country, can really say, I'm doing a job I love, you know? Mm. So many of us scratch around doing our best and not really like it very much.
But when you look around now, I mean, the one thing that you could honestly say about yourself, which is enviable, I suppose, to anybody, a young person in the business now, is that you were in the business at a time when it was the most glamorous, the most exciting, the most fun business in the world, it must have been. And it had a certain amount of style, which singularly is lacking now. Do you find that? Does what's happening today, does it disappoint you when you look what's happened to your industry and to the people in it?
It doesn't, Michael. It's changed completely. The star system is gone, of course. There's much more opportunity for people. See, as I said before, there were 22,000 extras. How much talent never got a chance to open its face? Now there's television. I mean, even doing a commercial, people have discovered. And I think it's much easier for the young to start now, but much harder to keep going because they're not backed up by the studios and by the contracts and by the family system. I think it's great. I think they're making wonderful movies now, really great movies now. But it's frightfully tough. There's a lot of muck is made, and I'm afraid that when people get entertainment free, they don't criticize the quality. And I think we're not making movies now really for a movie audience anymore. We're making movies for an audience that's not brainwashed, but so used to television And so many of the series turned out in America are so slipshod and they're thrown together, not time to write them well. But people get used to it. They don't even listen, maybe. I think the standard's gone down.
How generally speaking do you view old age? Because you're 70 now, aren't you?
71.
71. So, I mean, how do you view it? How do you view this phase of your life?
Well, I mean, there's no point in saying, well, look at this, it suddenly happened tonight. I don't know what that is.
That's
Find out
nerves,
tomorrow.
That's nerves.
But I try to be the best I am for my age, the best I can do for my age. I do everything. I ski and swim and all that sort of thing, but I don't view the future with any great longing. And I just hope that I'll be gone before those awful things start dropping, the big ones. Something alarms me very much about the big ones is that I read today that America is arming like mad, but I don't think anybody's going to let it off. But what I do think, none of my business is, but the thing that worries me is that our national game is football, or cricket. America's cricket, football, Germany's football, everybody's football, and Russia's chess. That worries me very much.
Thank you very much indeed for being my guest tonight. All the best with your novel. Go slowly, come back quickly. I'm sure you'll have great success with it. Ladies and gentlemen, David Niven.
Thank you very much.
This was Niven's last television interview for the BBC. It was reported that family and friends were shocked by it, thinking that his slurring speech was a sign that he'd suffered a stroke. Within a year, he'd been diagnosed with motor neurons disease. And 2 years later, he died at home in Switzerland, aged 73. At his funeral, the biggest wreath came from the porters at Heathrow Airport, with a card that read, "To the finest gentleman that ever walked through these halls." He made a porter feel like a king.